I will go ahead and introduce our other panelists. We've got from New Brunswick, we've got Tracy Glynn, who has completed her PhD in interdisciplinary studies at the University of New Brunswick on unceded Wolastoqiyik territory. She teaches courses on environmental practice, social movements, gender, and globalization at St. Thomas University. And she works on the gendered nature of everyday resistance to mining in Indonesia, where she worked for many years, and as the forest campaigner at the Conservation Council of New Brunswick. From 2006 to 2018, she advocated for better forestry and mining policies. She's also on the board of directors of Mining Watch Canada and does international solidarity work with mine affected communities in Indonesia, the Philippines, Colombia, Guatemala, and beyond. Glenn Wheeler is from Newfoundland. He's a member of the Kalipu Mi'kmaq First Nation and host of the podcast and radio program Mi'kmaq Matters, which is a podcast about Mi'kmaq people, politics, land, and water. He grew up in the Mi'kmaq community of York Harbour in Western Newfoundland, where he has a home. He visits often in normal times. These are not normal times. But Glenn has worked as a professional journalist and currently practices law in Toronto. Glenn was June Colwood Graduate Fellow in Indigenous Law at the University of Toronto, where he received a Master's of Law degree. I would like to introduce Robert Lang, who is the co-director and producer of The Shadow of Gold. Robert is an independent documentary filmmaker whose Toronto company, Kensington Communications, has created over 200 television productions for international markets, including Canadian Screen Award-winning series Museum Secrets, The Sacred Balance with David Suzuki, and my personal favorite, the Gemini Award-winning feature documentary Diamond Road, which is an in-depth exploration of the diamond industry from mine to market. In Nova Scotia, we have Charlotte Connolly, who is a community organizer and environmental justice advocate based in Truro, Nova Scotia, Mi'kmaq. She is a member of Sustainable Northern Nova Scotia and a researcher with the Justice and Corporate Accountability Project, where she works on local and global issues of resource extraction, particularly the collusion between public and private actors in the imposition of top-down development models. She's starting law school at Dalhousie next week, with hopes of refining her advocacy skills in support of communities struggling for self-determination and self-governance. And as long as the power lasts in Cape Breton, we have Joan Baxter, who is an award-winning author and journalist from Nova Scotia. For more than 3 decades, she lived and worked in and also reported from 7 countries in Africa, where she was a correspondent for the BBC and contributed to many other media. And we have the last poll question coming up, which says, do you know where the gold in your jewelry comes from? Yes, no, a bit, or I'm not wearing any gold, or I don't have any gold. Sorry. And so Joan Baxter also worked as a science writer for the World Agroforestry Center and the Center for International Forestry Research, and has authored 7 books. In the past 2 years, she's written extensively about the extractive sector in her native Nova Scotia, including the award-winning series of articles for the Halifax Examiner entitled Fool's Gold. So that is our roundtable, and that is the end of our poll questions. So thank you everybody for participating in those fun polls. So the last couple of polls, what is the primary reason you are at this event? Most people are concerned about the environment, and many are concerned specifically about a mine or community in their own region, in their own community. And then there's 18 people who are just here out of general interest. And the last poll result is, I don't know if we should leave this for Bob to answer, but I think the question is, what % of gold do you think is used for functional items? Is it 1%? We've got a lot of support for 1%. 10% is, I think, what most people are supporting. 25%, not so many people, and 60%, even fewer. So the consensus seems to be that not very much gold is actually used for functional purposes. And I'll let Bob come back to that when we come around. And And so before we launch in, I just want to sort of frame this discussion a little bit because, we are living in a very strange historical moment. A lot of the economic activity that seemed to be really unstoppable has stopped, and some of it has restarted, and some of it's changing direction. A lot of our social activities are curtailed. That's why we're doing this online and not in people's community centers or living rooms as we originally hoped to do. And things are just changing quite radically. And some of that is obviously not good, but there's also the potential for it to be very good in the sense that we have an opportunity to re-examine how things work, how our economy works, how our society works. And I think the pandemic has obviously opened up a lot of those questions. We figured out who the essential workers really are, and they're not the best paid. We've learned who can stay home and work from home or kind of not work, and nothing really bad happens. And we figured out who really has to put their lives on the line to keep society functioning, to look after people's health, to look after our food supply. And we're looking at gold mining in that context. So, the other side of that is that the economic and financial uncertainty around mining and the profit opportunities have meant that the price of gold has skyrocketed. It was over $2,000 last week. And then there was some news about vaccines, which interestingly made the price of gold come down again a little bit. But that's the effect of that on the gold mining industry. It's really put a lot of wind in their sails, as it were. So, new mines are being opened up, existing mines are going full bore, whether there's a pandemic on or not, and whatever the effects are on the workers or the communities that they come from. And we're looking at that, and then we're trying to look forward and see what happens. How does this change things, and what is the place of gold and gold mining in the future that we're struggling towards at this point? So with that, I would like to open it up to Robert Lang to maybe talk a little bit about the film itself and what, Robert, what were your hopes for the film as a tool for change, and what kind of discussions did you hope for out of it?
Well, thanks and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. I hope you've all seen the film by now. If not, we are going to be leaving the link up until the end of the day today. But hopefully you've seen the film and you have a sense of how it works. It's another sprawling international look at an international commodity. Previously we've done films on the diamond industry, as Jamie alluded to, Diamond Road. We did one on the opium industry and the failure of the war on drugs through that commodity, and now this one. What we've tried to do in all of them is humanize the stories by finding people who work at or are dependent on a different aspect of the commodity and its marketing, its exploitation, and or its production. So we have miners, we have people who sell gold, we have people who benefit from gold, we have jewelers, we have miners. So we've tried to do that and tell human stories to sort of join the dots between them in many different parts of the world. Very ambitious project, and it's a very ambitious way of making films that we only started doing with Diamond Road, which was directed by Nisha Pahuja. It was an attempt to not just humanize the stories, but also make connections between different parts of the world that wouldn't ordinarily see themselves as being connected. So they've all been we've tried to make them all as a center focus, a center or a focus for conversations around those industries and what the benefits and what the negative aspects of those industries are. And the difficulty with the other films, in a sense, is that they were made for TV. So from a filmmaker's point of view, you get a sense from audience reaction, or in the case of Diamond Road, won a number of awards and so on, you get a sense that they're doing something, that people are, you know, affected, or maybe their minds are changed, or they've thought about something in a different way. But you don't get the kind of audience reaction that you do when you have screenings. And only in the last two films that we've done of this type, Raw Opium and this one, have we started to do screenings in-person screenings in theaters. So that's a real pleasure for me, because it kind of harkens back to my early days working at the National Film Board, making films, you know, through Challenge for Change and other entities there. The Environment Unit, the very early Environment Unit, where we would take the films out and we would actually go to church halls, literally go to church halls and libraries and screen it, and then have discussions about those films. And this seems to, in a certain sense, it seems to be a similar, has a similar kind of dynamic. When we have screenings, Joan was participated in one in Halifax, and we had them across the country pre-COVID, and now doing these virtually. I love this sense that people are exposed to the realities of people around the world and can see how maybe they are linked, in a sense, to the bigger picture. And that was our goal in the first place. And in this virtual and in-person screenings, we see that it really has that desired effect, where people are really not just excited about the subject matter of the film or their personal connection to it, but they see these surprising connections and think about the commodity perhaps in a different way. So this one, in a sense, was really unusual, in that even, you know, now in COVID, I don't know how many of you are filmmakers, but many people in many industries have been seriously impacted by COVID. In film, and when we're making documentary films, we can't travel. So it's a real problem when you're making documentary films, especially when they are films that are made in different parts of the world. In this case, it was pre-COVID, but we already started, locating filmmakers in different parts of the world. As you can tell, we filmed in Peru, and we filmed in China, we filmed in DRC, we filmed really all around the world. We couldn't have done that without the involvement of some very good filmmakers in different parts of the world, both for cultural language issues. Really, it was an intentional effort on our part to find the right filmmakers who could help us tell these intimate stories in these different parts of the world, so that they would come to life. And little did we know that these days with COVID, people are not doing that at all. They're finding filmmakers or finding co-producers in different parts of the world to help them make their films. So it was a real joy, actually, to do this. We found some wonderful collaborators, and this is probably the most collaborative film I've ever made, with directors and camera people from literally 4 continents. So I don't know what else to say. I think I just welcome, you know, thank you so much for joining us, and I welcome any questions afterwards about, you know, the filmmaking process or about the content of the film. We worked on it as these things go, for quite a long time. It was about 4 years from inception development through to the completion last year. So I'm pretty pretty knowledgeable about the subject, but I think there are other people here on the panel who know a lot more about it, especially about the particularities of their regions. So thanks for joining us, and we will talk later, I hope.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear, and you can see that in the film. You know, the way the stories from places like China that, you know, most of us don't have access to. I'd like to turn to our roundtable here, and I think I'll start with Charlotte and go counterclockwise around my screen. I don't know what anyone else's screen looks like, but I want to ask each of you just for a really brief reflection on the film, and you know, what did you get out of the film? What really grabbed you out of the film, and are there any particular things that you learned, or that really astonished you, or that really meant a lot to you in your work, in your place, and in your struggles? So, Charlotte?
Thank you, Jamie. Well, I'm going to draw off of what Robert said a lot, in that I think the film beautifully illustrates how gold mining is a profoundly local but simultaneously global issue in terms of the connections between people, places, and the livelihoods that are affected. You know, one quote from the film that really spoke to me was Jacinda Mack, when she said, you know, for them to be so rich, so many have to be so poor. And I think we get a fascinating glimpse into gold's international supply chain, recognizing that, you know, it's a mineral which has been intimately connected to histories of colonization, dispossession, as well as contemporary violence around the world. And, you know, in a context of state corporate collusion, both nationally and transnationally, I think access to justice and remedy is absolutely key, but it's elusive. You know, the cases of Mount Poly, Democratic Republic of the Congo, China, they all illustrate how everyday people impacted by this industry can't seem to access justice. And there was another quote, I believe it was from one of the bankers, who said, you know, gold is not an asset class, it's a religion. And I think that ideology is deeply embedded in our collective psyches and our global economic system. Yet it's the public and the environment who will ultimately bear the brunt of the industry's impacts, all for short-term corporate profit. So I think that kind of summarizes my impression of the film. You know, there was a lot of rich material in there, but broadly, those are my reflections. Go on mute.
Thanks very much, thanks, Charlotte. I'm going to turn to Glynn.
Okay, Jamie, thank you.
So, same question.
Yes, so I think the two things that spoke to me from Bob's film, as Bob said, he was connecting the dots. So I was struck by the fatalism by some of the people who we saw scavenging for gold there, and they were asked, you know, aren't you concerned about the impact on your health? And they said, well, you know, you got to die sometime of something. And I guess the fatalism that we find in Newfoundland is not quite as dramatic as that, but people do say, people in central Newfoundland, where a lot of the mining activity is taking place, it's a mining territory. So when you ask them, are they afraid about accidents and the impact on the environment? They say, well, you know, with mining, you know, there is risk and accidents do happen, but that's the price of mining and the jobs that come from mining, and, you know, things happen. So I think the fatalism is a bit of a universal that people they rationalize in their minds about the risk and benefit. And I was also struck by the Yellowstone example and the success people had there in stopping a mine. And it was a coalition of people, very different groups of people. And I think it teaches us that if we want to build successful coalitions, we have to work with people who might not be in our necessarily social circle, who we might not agree with, you know, on all political questions. You know, we might be working with, you know, as we saw in the Yellowstone example, you know, people who might perceive as being right-wing or conservative sometimes, but they also have an affinity with nature and know how important it is. And I think we have to reach out and we have to know how to have a conversation to reach people politically and emotionally across, you know, some otherwise political divide. So that's a lesson and a challenge for us, I think.
That's really interesting. Thanks. And I'm going to go to Joan now and ask you to reflect on the film.
Wow. I've seen this film, I think 4 or 5 times now. And every time I see it, something new grabs me.
Yeah.
And maybe because we're in the depths of COVID, what struck me this time, and the price of gold, as we know, is skyrocketing, and people are saying it's going to go up to $10,000 an ounce because there's going to be total economic collapse. I heard one of the investors say it holds its value and purchasing power, when there's economic uncertainty. And all I could think was, yeah, but what about if there's economic, health, and environmental uncertainty? Gold isn't a vaccine. You can't drink it. You can't eat it. It's not going to do you much good if you've got no water. And that's what kept coming back to me in the viewing that I did today of the film, is the absurdity of human beings going out and causing mayhem to the surface of the planet that sustains them, to dig up these tiny, tiny little bits of metal, which they then proceed to bury again in bank vaults or in their gardens, as one of the investors said. And that's what kept coming back to me, is the total absurdity of us going out there. I think the new figure that they gave is half, I think in the film, it's 0.5 gram per ton is kind of the going rate these days. To get 0.5 gram of gold, you need a ton of rock. You think about the disturbance on the surface of this poor beleaguered planet at a time of climate crisis, biodiversity loss, and water shortages, and a health emergency. And you think, and people are investing in that? Okay, fine. But it just, again, it just showed me how absurd that love of that metal is. And the other thing that struck me again is how many of those people all around the world, as you said, Bob, the people defending the gold mining, and I separate gold mining from other mining, I'm very careful about that, kept saying, oh, well, you're there to get the sound, your camera and everything. You need this metal. Everybody's against it, but you need the metal. That's exactly the argument we hear all the time. But of course, we know that we have enough gold in bank vaults to serve all of the industrial needs that we would ever have for it. And I too, like Glynn, was really struck by that community getting together and fighting for what they believed in their own community. I think that was very heartening, and I think that was a really important story to tell. But there were so many wrenching stories in that film of the miner in China, of the artisanal miners in Peru, and I've seen them also in West Africa, who are killing themselves with the mercury, but it's desperation. But once again, it's a metal for rich people. And that's what came back to me again and again and again tonight when I watched the film. Sort of sums up my take. I think I would have called it, Bob, the specter of gold, not the shadow of gold.
Well, that would certainly give it a particular ghoulish flavor, wouldn't it? Just on that, I'm going to go back to the poll question and just give away the answer, because the answer, according to the World Gold Council, who we assume are authorities on such things, that maybe 10% of the gold that is mined, that is produced worldwide, is actually used in electronics and such things. Space shuttle windshield defrosters and everything like that. The rest is either used for jewelry or is melted into gold bars and up into bank vaults. So, and because it's such a wonderfully non-perishable, non-tarnishing, and recyclable metal, pretty much all of the gold that's ever been mined is still around. And the result is that, that industrial use that we, we're probably kind of wasteful about, but which is actually, technologically and very useful. We've all got our devices, and that's part of what brings us here tonight. But there's something like 100 years worth of supply already mined for all of that use, and that's not including any further recycling. The fact that we need to be recycling our cell phones and not just leaving them in a drawer when they wear out or go obsolete. Anyway, that's a little diversion, but I'd like to quickly turn back to Tracy before we lose the thread of the conversation, and ask you to reflect on the film.
Yeah, what I really appreciated about the film is how it humanized the people behind gold. I think mining is very much a project that dehumanizes people, and so I really appreciated the different stories that Bob brought to light in the film. And I also appreciate like the work that Joan Baxter does and Glynn Wheeler too, and sharing stories, all the journalism work that you both do to tell these stories that are so important. The other thing that I'm still shocked by, even though I know how much waste is produced in mining, but that still is something that is something that I think more people need to be aware of. And when like Joan Kuyak talks about how mining is really a waste a waste what is it, a waste industry, and that's what it is. And here in New Brunswick, we don't have any active gold mines right now. We do have companies exploring for gold, but we do have active mine projects where the waste is really the key concern. How are these mining companies going to dump their waste, and how they're going to be using our fish-bearing water bodies that are so precious to people here. So yeah, I think this film is so important for people to see, to know, the people that are behind the gold.
Thanks. And I wanted to have a sort of a second round of questions, and for you folks to look back at, or look forward maybe ahead what's going on in your own areas and your own work related to this. And again, just if you can just give us a really quick few sentences, a quick comment on where's all this going, and what's good, what's not so good, what are the opportunities, what are the impending disasters that we really need to be worried about, and what's really great about the way people are working together, or whatever. So I'm going to go backwards, and I'm going to go back to Tracy since she was last in the first round. Go ahead.
So I noticed that there's a number of people here that are active with organizations like Breaking the Silence and Breaking the Silence that does solidarity work in Guatemala. And I think about the land defenders, and we're hearing from organizations like Global Witness where, there's a record number of environmental activists, land defenders that are murdered every year, and many of them for resisting mining projects, big agro projects and such. And I think that, Jamie's asking about something hopeful, but I think there is hope in the resistance. I think when you see people standing up and defending their land, and they're also sharing their stories. So like, I think Jacinda Mack, who's in the film, something that she said to all of us when she visited here on Wolastoqey territory where I am, and people here are concerned about the Sisson tungsten molybdenum mine project. And I think she said something about how the struggle is really a love story. And that really, resonated with a lot of people. And I think, yeah, it is. I think we have to, you know, we're learning from each other's struggles. Films like Bob's film are educating us about how people are successfully resisting. And I think that's, you know, while we mourn the loss of life, you know, whether it's through targeted assassinations that are happening at gold mines around the world, and or just from the, you know, the shortened lives through structural violence, through, you know, the workers that are dying of lead poisoning and other workplace diseases. You know, we mourn, but we also need to organize. And I think something that I would like to see, maybe like the film talks about fair trade gold and such, but I think we also need to, you know, be looking at capitalism and looking at how, I think of anything of, you know, business or activity that we do under capitalism. Mining is one that really shows how dehumanizing and destructive our economic system is, and that we need to be looking at something that, you know, an economic system that is free from the profit motive, that meets everybody's needs. And I think, you know, when we look at gold mining, we know that, you know, that's something that we don't need. And so that's all I have to say on that, I guess.
Thanks, that's great. And I'll ask Joan, you know, in your decades of perspective from West Africa to Nova Scotia, what do you see happening?
I wish I could say that I thought that the regulators on this side of the ocean were a lot better. I'm afraid that from what I've seen, our mining laws in Canada are quite archaic, very colonial, that the Crown owns everything underneath, and that supersedes all other property law. I find that very distressing. I think it could be changed. And I think when people mobilize as they are in Nova Scotia, which is really remarkable, because this mining this latest gold rush in Nova Scotia is very new. It's only really got going in the last 3 years. We got our first mine in 70 or 80 years. Nova Scotia had 3 big gold rushes, and we don't even know yet. We haven't even mapped the mess that's been left behind with the arsenic and the mercury from those. And we're about to spend $50 million to clean up just 3 of those sites. And we don't really know how to clean them up either, because that's also a real art. So Nova Scotia is really in a unique position, a bit like California, that we've been through this before. So we should be extremely cautious this time. And of course, these are open pit mines that they're looking at now, because the grade is much lower than it was before. So that means removing enormous amounts of vegetation, digging into rock, and our regulators allow the mining companies to monitor themselves. I have been in touch with Nova Scotia Environment to find out, for example, we've had a drought in Nova Scotia this summer where people have no well water left. Whether the province had reduced the amount of water that Atlantic Gold was allowed to use. And they said, no, they haven't. And they count on the mining company to monitor the flow. And otherwise, they don't even check on it. I think that we really need to strengthen our regulators. They have to be regulators and not cheerleaders. The other thing that I think is very useful, as I see the groups developing in Nova Scotia, and I see such an awareness, we've got the St. Mary's River Association, Sustainable Northern Nova Scotia. There have been so many groups springing into action wherever the exploration is happening, and it's happening everywhere right now. I mean, the whole province is basically under exploration leases for gold. Is that people need to learn the PR lines of the gold mining companies and the exploration people. And it was interesting because the proponent of the gold mine in the United States in the film said, oh, well, let's see what's there. you know it takes 10 years to get a mine going. That is exactly the same line we've had here in northern Nova Scotia. And of course, everybody knows that if they do find gold, the chances of stopping it after they found the gold are just about zero. So that line is actually very deceptive. You should stop, as they did there, stop the exploration if you don't want to have a mine. Because if they find gold, you'll never stop it. And with all the new trade treaties that we're bound into, we don't even have a chance of stopping people without getting sued, as we found in Nova Scotia with a quarry. So where I find hope here is the level of engagement of the citizens in this province, who no longer just look in their own backyard, they look at the whole province as their backyard. And so the different groups are going around and giving solidarity and exchanging ideas with the other groups, and just keeping on top of what's happening and trying to hold our government to account. And that gives me a lot of hope, because we need transparency here and we don't have it. I think that kind of sums up where I am on the issue here.
Interesting.
Thanks. So I'll turn to Glynn now with the same question. Where we go from here.
Well, in Newfoundland is in the is a favored jurisdiction of the international gold mining industry. It has a compliant provincial government, two compliant First Nations who are hopeful of getting their members jobs in mining. There's one major project called Valentine Lake, which is in the middle of Newfoundland. It's a mega mine, several open pit mines, covering a development area of 10 by 20 kilometers, so a 200 square kilometer development zone. It's at the height of land, so a lot of the water courses for a large part of the island of Newfoundland are located in the headwaters are in this mining area. So it's a very sensitive environmental area for that reason. Is a caribou migratory zone, and the Exploits River, which runs through there, is the most important salmon river on the island of Newfoundland. So a big project, and a lot of environmental consequences, but very unlike Nova Scotia, very little public engagement for several reasons. One, it's in a remote area, so there aren't, it isn't like Yellowstone National Park where you have a lot of tourists wandering through and have a relationship to that area. And furthermore, the towns in that area, Millertown is the town closest, and it is a Mi'kmaq community, but the support for the mine there is very strong. And whatever opposition there is to that mine is from elsewhere in Newfoundland. Of course, that creates a political problem about telling people what they should do with their land as they think of it. And you try to explain, well, the land is all our land, but it's a bit awkward at times. So we have that very large project, and then next door to the southwest, there's a continuation of the same vein of gold that almost crosses Newfoundland. So down towards the southwest corner, there's an extension of that gold being developed by an Australian company called Matador Gold, and we had the executive director on our last episode, and he explained how they were mining in East Africa, but they got burned in East Africa because they had regime change and they lost a lot of money. But then they heard about Newfoundland and about the very supportive provincial government, about they can get cheap electric power, and it's a good place to do business. So that Australian company is raising money on the Australian Stock Exchange to develop this mine in southwestern Newfoundland. And so they've got about 500,000 ounces discovered. they'll be applying for their environmental permits next year. Marathon Gold, which is the developing the mine I talked about before, the Valentine Lake mine, it will be filing its environmental impact statement any day now, and then the public participation in that phase will begin. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. There are the salmon fishing community is concerned, and there are various pockets of concern, but there isn't the sort of we haven't achieved the momentum that it sounds like from Joan that there is in Nova Scotia. So it's a challenge because of location, because of the support of jobs. And so those of us trying to persuade people to think about it more carefully before we dig up, this very sensitive and very extensive part of the island of Newfoundland. It's a big challenge for us getting traction in this conversation. So that's our struggle at the moment.
Thanks, Glenn. That's really interesting. And back to you, Charlotte.
Yes, I will try to be short with my love story of resistance, but that's going to be hard. So in addition to being a member of Sustainable Northern Nova Scotia, I actually coordinate a network of organizations here that are opposing open pit gold mining. It includes Ecology Action Center, the Sierra Club, Eastern Shore Forest Watch, St. Mary's River Association. So we meet kind of on a semi-regular basis to strategize. Right now, there's only one gold mine currently operating in Nova Scotia. It's the Turquoise mine in Moose River, owned by Atlantic Gold. However, there's 4 others undergoing environmental assessment, including the Cochrane Hill project, which is right beside the pristine salmon-bearing St. Mary's River. And despite the Mining Association's promises of prosperity, gold mining is not a pillar of our economy. And in fact, it threatens our other traditional industries like fishing, agriculture, and tourism especially. Our network, we personally don't think that the short-term benefits, a few hundred jobs and a meager royalty rate, that they justify the high costs, including mercury and arsenic contamination. More locally here, Sons learnt from the province that they were going to issue what's called a request for proposals for gold mining exploration in the Cobequid Highlands. This is the first time this administrative process has ever been used in Canada's mineral sector, and it was decided upon after the Nova Scotia Department of Energy and Mines did extensive geological work in the area. Sons personally believes this is a gross mismanagement of public funds, especially considering the lack of adequate consultation. So in response, we launched the Water Not Gold campaign. We created a petition, we put up signage, and we hosted events like a water walk led by the Mi'kmaq grassroots grandmothers. So kind of like the coalition building that we saw in Yellowstone. And after 2 years of community advocacy work and engagement in a democratic process, the municipal council here decided to unanimously approve the watershed regulations that ban mining in the French River watershed. So that's a huge success. However, those regulations still need to be approved by the Minister of the Environment, Gordon Wilson, and we fully expect him to approve those regulations. However, the mining industry here is lobbying to prevent their adoption. And we think that showcases how this industry will undermine and circumvent local decision-making for their private interest. In fact, the Mining Association has even characterized our engagement in democratic processes as manipulative, saying that we're a small but vocal group and that we're spreading misinformation based on misconceptions about gold mining. Meanwhile, companies like Atlantic Gold are seeking to capitalize on the pandemic by touting themselves as saviors through a PR campaign and distributing community aid. So that's kind of the landscape we're dealing with right now. We're in the fight, and I concur with Joan that water is worth more than gold, and we're going to continue to persevere to prevent any more gold mines from opening. That's all.
Thanks, Charlotte. So we have a few minutes left, and I think, given that we started a few minutes late, we could conceivably go on past the top of the hour if everyone's willing to
Sure.
stay in for
Sure.
a bit. Joan Baxter is saying there's a thunderstorm coming, and she may lose power and disappear, which would be really sad. So we'll just, in case anyone's wondering where she went, it's just her power going out, and hopefully that's all it is. We've got a couple of questions already. People have put in the Q&A box, and just a reminder to folks that you can, if you have a question, you can put it in there, and we'll try and respond. So the first question that Robert has answered, or sort of answered, but the question was, given the pervasiveness of gold mining issues around the world, how did you and your team go about selecting which communities or stories to highlight in the film? And Robert's answer was that this is a big question and a really hard one to sum up. So, especially when we've only got, you know, a short time together tonight. So he suggested going to the Shadow of Gold website, theshadowofgold.com, and checking out the interviews that he's done with Sirius, or on Sirius, and also was it last week, the podcast with Glynn. There's another question.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want that to be a cop. I didn't want that to be a cop out, but it is, you know, it does take 3 or 4 years to make film like this. So you can imagine there are many factors that go into those decisions, and they're really too complicated to just summarize in a few words. So
yeah, and I'm sure some of it's simply logistics and practicality, where even if you wanted to go to one place, it might turn out not to be possible, and you have to go somewhere else.
That's right.
So, and then your challenge is to fit it all together.
Yeah.
But the other question is from Ecology Action Center. Is that Karen? I think. Anyway, she says, thank you to each panelist for sharing their stories and points of view. Let's say we want to end gold mining, but we also want to minimize impacts to mine workers by transitioning them to other local jobs, ideally green jobs. And what kind of jobs and trades at mines can be transitioned to other employers? Do you know of anywhere transitioning workers away from a mine? So, if anybody want to tackle that on our panel tonight? Tracy, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just know of organizations like Iron and Earth that, and some of the panelists may know more about this, but like that's one organization that in the last, or one of the last downturns in the tar sands, that was retraining workers to work in renewable energy. So there are organizations like that have, Iron and Earth, I think, has chapters in different cities across the country. It's one example that I know of.
Yeah, I know when I was working in northern Saskatchewan, one of the real challenges we had was trying to make the mine training programs themselves more transferable, to look more at trades and skills and less at sort of specific mining related jobs. Because, you know, if you're a heavy duty mechanic, well, you can work on road graders and such things, but really it's a pretty specific skill set. And if you're a mill operator, it's even worse. So, you've got abilities, but the specific skills are not that transferable, unlike trades or more general skills. And one of the real trends that, one of the problems we've seen is that people, you have to go through that retraining. There isn't really a lot of obvious places to go. At the same time, a lot of communities are actually making a business, and this is happening in Northern Ontario as well as Northern Alberta, making a business out of cleanup, because that's what they've got. And there are actually lots of job opportunities. And as we saw, not just a couple of months ago, the federal government put a whole bunch of money into, trying to rescue Alberta by paying them to clean up the abandoned oil wells. And there's all kinds of abandoned mine sites, and the mines that are shutting down will need to be cleaned up and will need to be looked after for a long time. So there's lots of need there. The question really is trying to line up the skills and try and diversify. And that's, you know, I think that's one of the arguments we've been making all along is that especially not just industry, but governments focusing on mining as a path of development leaves you without the alternatives. I mean, it closes the door to not just tourism, but agriculture, fisheries. It takes away from all those things. It doesn't just rob them of the investment. It actually makes it more difficult to do those things. And it makes it harder to develop a more diversified and resilient economy and a more, you know, locally integrated and productive economy. Instead you've got a globalized extractive economy, and the people at the bottom don't have a lot of room to move. When it disappears, they're kind of screwed. So it is a challenge, you know, and that's what we're up against. We have another question from Elaine Hughes about how would fair trade gold ever become a reality? Maybe Bob, you can answer this one.
Sorry, I was muted there. Yeah, hi, Elaine. Well, again, a big question. It has become a reality, but the reality is that it's such a tiny bit of the reality that it's barely a drop in the bucket. I believe the latest statistics are that it's just over 0.1% of all gold produced. It might even be all artisanal gold produced. So it's a tiny, tiny amount. So I think that what I've found very interesting in different parts where we've screened it in different regions of Canada last year, when jewelers see the film and when they start talking about this, the implications of gold mining as it's done currently, they get very excited. I mean, people who have a social conscience and people who care about the products that they produce, they get quite excited about the idea of trying to source their gold from sustainable sources and from ethical sources. And they are getting active. We've had screenings in Europe, in the UK, that were, the central focus was how do jewelers and metalsmiths change the demand for gold for jewelry. And it's quite a growing trend, especially among younger jewelers, millennials, and younger jewelers that we've met. They get quite excited about the prospects, and they realize that it has to start at the demand. And if the jewelers can demand fair trade gold and understanding and knowing where that gold comes from, they can pass that on to their clients. And I found that quite a bit, in a way, a bit surprising, but I found it very heartening to see. And this only came to us after the fact. We met some jewelers who were already doing that. I think one of them is in the film. But there are many, many others in Quebec and in Toronto, in Vancouver. We met jewelers and who were going to only buy ethical gold. Mm. So that's one way that it can change. But whether it's still going to be a drop in the bucket unless it happens on a massive scale.
Right.
Yeah, there is an organization, Jackie just reminded me, that called Impact. Can you hear me all right? It says my internet connection is unstable, but Jackie reminded me that, Jackie reminded me that Impact is doing some very good work in DRC and other parts of the world, working with artisanal miners to produce ethical gold. And they're having quite a bit of success. there are others around the world who are pushing in that area. There's an initiative called the Irma Initiative, which is the Initiative for Responsible Mining, that is actually taking on challenging industrial miners, big mining companies to produce gold in a more sustainable way. That's, it's questionable how much of an impact that'll have, but they're really trying. So there are organizations around that are making an effort to produce gold and sustainably and ethically.
Great, thanks. And there's one more comment from Grand Chief Ronald Tremblay, saying a comment here in the Eastern Coast, Mi'kmaq, Wauwatosa, and Passamaquoddy have peace and friendship treaties to protect our people, lands, and resources, and they're protected under Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution. The 1725-26 Peace and Friendship Treaty. So this is not a new thing. This has been there for several centuries now. Says in Article 5 that if any Indians are injured by any of His Majesty's subjects or their dependents, they shall have satisfaction and reparation made to them according to His Majesty's laws, whereof the Indians shall have the benefits equal with His Majesty's other subjects. Yeah, I'm not sure we've been, as one of the settler people here, I'm not sure we've been able to live up to that commitment. But thank you, Grand Chief, for bringing that up. It's an important reminder and a recognition of the values that are put on that are placed on entire peoples. So before we go, I'd like to give our roundtable here a chance. If anyone has any sort of quick parting comments before we wrap up, we're going to go to a couple more poll questions as we close up. These are anonymous and just sort of to ask for feedback on the event. And remind you that the film is available for viewing until midnight tonight if you haven't finished watching it, or if you haven't watched it or you want to watch it again, then it's still there for another couple of hours. Yeah, so
I should just mention,
sure.
Jamie, just one thing. I did mention the shadowofgold.com, which is the website. I should say that there's going to be a lot more media on there, clips and so on, but also links to organizations. There's a take action area of the website, which has links to a number of organizations doing some pretty good work. You might want to check those out, just in case you haven't seen it.
Right, because that is part of the impact program of the film, is to, what we're doing tonight and what we're trying to do across the country, and use this film and provide all those other resources. So the shadowofgold.com website is meant to be sort of a portal for all of that. Right, theshadowofgold.com.
Yes, it is.
Anyone else have parting comments?
Yeah, Charlotte here. Sorry,
Charlotte?
I just wanted
And then
to.
Joan?
Yeah, I wanted to quickly speak to Chief Tremblay's comment. So 2 of Atlantic Gold's mines that are currently undergoing assessment, Beaver Dam and 15 Mile, they're currently stalled, or the impact assessment agency has asked for more information because they haven't sufficiently detailed the impact to treaty rights, to hunting rights, fishing rights, and whatnot. So there's been a serious lack of adequate consultation with the First Nations communities that will be affected. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can go to the impact assessment website and see what they're asking of Atlantic Gold, which it will be interesting to see if they can deliver on it. And then in terms of just my general closing comments, I think that people, kind of echoing what Tracy said, people are really beginning to see the cracks in our capitalist consumerist society, and realizing the need to transition towards a circular economy. And I think that's really the point that I would want to drive home, is that gold mining is not essential, that we can recycle our existing supply for all our technological and medical needs, including green energy. And we need to start prioritizing health, equity, and fairness in our economic models. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Great, thanks. Joan, do you want to jump in?
Thank you, Charlotte. That's exactly what I wanted you to say. Because I'd like to just follow up on that. It fits perfectly. I mean, gold mining is a perfect example of what we've done wrong on this planet in the last few hundred years, or longer, actually. I mean, gold has been associated with genocide in the Americas. It's been associated with everything that we've done wrong. Yes, it's a beautiful metal, but only if you close your eyes to the blood that covers most of it. And I would say in the case of gold mining today, especially in Nova Scotia, if you look at every one of those projects that they're actually proposing, and of course Atlantic Gold, which was ostensibly a Canadian company run by Australians, but of course conveniently located in Vancouver, sold out last year to the Australian company, St. Barbara. So we don't even get to see anymore what they're paying. They used to have to report to ESCMA in Ottawa, which allowed us to see what they were paying all levels of government in taxes and royalties. And taxes, I can tell you, was nothing in 2 years of production. And royalties were still very small compared to what they walked away with when they sold it for $722 million to an Australian company. But so there's no transparency at all for the people who are going to have to live with the legacy and the reality of those mines. And there's no full cost accounting of the long term. Those short-term jobs with the taxes that come, that's about the only taxes there are, is the jobs that go to government. But when you think about the legacy of those mines, and that we have toxic sites that are 150 years old that we still haven't dealt with, I think when you really start to look at any industry, and especially the extractives, that's where we come to what Tracy said. Let's look at our system. What Charlotte said, we need a circular economy, and let's really bring in all the real costs of something before we just talk about jobs. It's a much bigger picture than that. And I think the people are seeing it more rapidly than governments. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Jamie, if I could, 2 quick points based on what Joan was saying and the Grand Chief's comments. Indigenous people, we're supposed to think of 7 generations when we're in our stewardship of the earth and making decisions. Valentine Lake will have 10 years of work for mostly 400 equipment operators. So 10 years is not 7 generations, it's not even 1 generation. It's like part of a generation. So let's keep some perspective and think about those who come after us.
Absolutely, that's a really important message. There was another question about what other kind of campaigns and materials are being developed, and I just wanted to mention that we're working with Mining Watch is working with the Shadow Gold production team on a study guide so that the film can be used in schools. So that will be developed and actually in a way that can be certified by school boards for use in schools at different levels, basically from high school on up, and including university, to provide questions and other background material for teachers and professors. So that's something that we're working on that will be done later this year, I think.
It'll be done next week.
It's looking really good. And we're also hoping to get the funding to get that out in French as well, and to continue supporting the film with events like this and getting it out where people can learn and discuss these issues. So with that, I would like to wrap this up. We're now 15 minutes into our second hour of discussion here. So thank you all of you who tuned in, everybody who asked questions and made comments in the chat over here. Great to see this kind of discussion going on. And thank you to Bob and the Shadow of Gold team and the production team, and the folks behind the scenes making all this work. Will in particular, who's actually in England and is way past his bedtime. And to Glynn and Charlotte and Bob and Joan and Tracy, thank you very much for lending us your experience and insights for this moment.
And thank you, Jamie, for a great job of moderating. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you all, and don't forget you can still watch the film for a little bit longer.
Yeah, until midnight Eastern time, I think it is.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. All right, take care.